When I inherited my parents' house in West Mango Park last month, I thought the hardest part would be dealing with grief. I was wrong. The hardest part was dealing with Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president who decided within 5 minutes of meeting me that I didn't belong in her neighborhood. What started with a complaint about my mailbox color escalated into a full-scale campaign of harassment violation notices for grass that was too long, accusations about suspicious odors, and finally, a threat to foreclose on my home. Hello, my name is Sam. This is my story, and I don't know why she hates me so much. The moving truck pulled away from 420 Citrus Drive on a gray Tuesday morning in mid-November, leaving me standing alone in the driveway of my childhood home. Well, not entirely alone, Mrs. Patterson from across the street waved from her porch, and Mr. John, 2 doors down, was raking leaves, both familiar faces from holidays past when I'd visit Mom and Dad. The house looked exactly as I remembered it. Pale yellow siding, white trim, the wraparound porch where Dad used to drink his morning coffee. 14 months since Mom passed. 4 months since Dad followed her, and now it was mine. All 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and 32 years of memories I wasn't sure I was ready to live with every single day. But my apartment lease was up, and the mortgage on this place was actually less than my rent had been. So here I was, a 32-year-old high school English teacher moving back into her childhood bedroom. I was hauling the last box from my car when I heard the footsteps on the driveway behind me, sharp, purposeful clicks of heels on pavement. I turned to find a woman in her late 50s approaching with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the smile of someone performing politeness rather than feeling it. She was white, with platinum blonde hair styled in a helmet-like bob, wearing pressed khaki slacks, and a white blouse under a navy cardigan despite the mild Florida weather. A leather portfolio was tucked under one arm, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Hello there," she called out in a bright, artificial tone. "You must be the new owner. I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the West Mango Park Homeowners Association." She extended a manicured hand, and I shifted my box to shake it. "Sam Jones. Nice to meet you." Her handshake was brief, perfunctory, and her smile flickered when she got a good look at me, that momentary recalculation I'd seen 1,000 times before when people's assumptions didn't match reality. "Oh," she said, recovering quickly. "Sam, I was expecting. Well, never mind. Welcome to the neighborhood." There was an emphasis on neighborhood that I couldn't quite place, but it settled uncomfortably in my stomach. "Thank you. I actually grew up here, so it's more like coming home than moving somewhere new." I tried to keep my tone friendly, hoping I was misreading the situation. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Really? I don't recall seeing you around." It wasn't a question, but a challenge, as if my claim needed verification. My parents were Robert and Linda Jones. They lived here for 30 years. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something else. Surprise. Maybe calculation. Oh yes, the Joneses. Lovely people. I was so sorry to hear about their passing. The condolences sounded rehearsed, like she'd said them many times before to many different people. "Thank you. It's been difficult, but I'm looking forward to settling in." I gestured toward the house with the box still in my arms, hoping she'd take the hint that I had things to do. Instead, Patricia opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick packet of papers. "Well, as HOA president, it's my duty to ensure all residents are familiar with our community guidelines. These are our covenant conditions and restrictions. We call them CC and Rs. You'll find everything in here. Approved paint colors, landscaping requirements, parking regulations, noise ordinances, and so forth." She thrust the packet toward me, and I had to quickly adjust my grip on the box to take it. The document had to be 50 pages at least. "Your parents were excellent about compliance, never any issues. I trust you'll maintain the same standard." There was something pointed in the way she said, "Trust," like she was already expecting me to fail. Of course, I want to be a good neighbor. I tucked the packet under my arm with the box, my arm starting to ache. Patricia's gaze swept over the house, her nose wrinkling slightly. "I notice your mailbox could use a fresh coat of paint. The approved colors are listed on page 12. White, black, or forest green, those are your options. That faded blue simply won't do. I glanced at the mailbox, the same mailbox that had been there for 20 years, a cheerful sky blue that Mom had painted herself. Oh, I'll take a look at the guidelines. I just moved in this morning, so yes, well, first impressions matter in West Mango Park. Patricia smiled that thin smile again. We maintain certain standards here. Property values, you understand. We can't have the neighborhood looking shabby. The implication hung in the air between us that I, specifically, might make the neighborhood look shabby. I understand. I'll review everything and make sure I'm in compliance. My arms were really hurting now, and I desperately wanted this conversation to end. Wonderful. Oh, and one more thing. HOA dues are $250 per quarter, payable the 1st of January, April, July, and October. Your parents were always prompt with payment. The next payment is due December 1st, just a few weeks away. She snapped her portfolio shut with finality. If you have any questions, my contact information is on the first page of the CC&Rs. I'm always available to help residents maintain our community standards. The way she emphasized our community made it clear she wasn't sure I belonged to it yet. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore, she corrected sharply. I've been married for 32 years. The clarification felt like another test, another way to establish hierarchy. Mrs. Whitmore, I repeated dutifully. She gave a satisfied nod and turned on her heel, those sharp clicks receding back down the driveway. I watched her go, that uncomfortable feeling in my stomach solidifying into something closer to dread. I carried the box inside and dropped it in the living room, then stood at the front window watching Patricia cross the street to her house, a large 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and not a single leaf out of place. Mrs. Patterson appeared at my elbow, making me jump. I hadn't heard her come in through the back door that Mom always left unlocked for neighbors. I see you met Patricia, Mrs. Patterson said dryly. She was in her 70s, white-haired and kind-faced, wearing a floral house dress that looked like it had seen better decades. Just now, she seems thorough. Mrs. Patterson snorted. That's one word for it. Listen, honey, your mama was my dear friend for 25 years, so I'm going to tell you something she'd want you to know. Patricia Whitmore is trouble. She's been HOA president for 8 years, and in that time, she's made life miserable for anyone she decides doesn't fit her vision of what this neighborhood should be. I turned to face her fully. What do you mean? I mean, she uses those CC&Rs like a weapon. She'll find violations where none exist, levy fines for the smallest infractions, and if she really doesn't like you, she'll make your life a living hell. Mrs. Patterson's expression was grave. Your parents got along with her fine because they'd been here forever and they followed every rule to the letter. But you're new and... She trailed off, but I knew what she wasn't saying. And I'm black. I finished quietly. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed. I'm not saying Patricia's racist outright, but I am saying she has very specific ideas about who belongs here and who doesn't. The Hendersons 3 streets over, they're black. Been here 15 years. Patricia tried to fine them 6 times in 1 year for violations nobody else would have gotten cited for. They finally sold and moved away. A chill ran down my spine. That's insane. That's Patricia. Just be careful, honey. Document everything. Keep copies of every communication. And if she starts harassing you, don't be afraid to fight back. She's gotten away with her behavior for years because most people just cave and leave. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm. But you've got people here who'll back you up if you need it. After Mrs. Patterson left, I sat down with the CC&R packet and started reading. The rules were extensive and oddly specific. Grass couldn't exceed 3 inches in height. Holiday decorations could only be displayed for 30 days before and 7 days after the holiday. No vehicles could be parked in driveways overnight unless they were in an enclosed garage. Exterior paint colors required written approval before application, and on for 47 single-spaced pages. At the back of the packet was a schedule of fines for violations. $50 for the first offense, $100 for the second, $250 for the third, with the threat of legal action and potential foreclosure for repeated non-compliance. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't a community association, it was a homeowner dictatorship. That night, I lay in my old bedroom, which I'd painted a soft sage green and furnished with a new bed. since I couldn't bear to sleep in Mom and Dad's room yet and stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake coming back here. But I'd sold most of my furniture, given up my apartment, and this house was paid off except for the small mortgage Dad had taken out to replace the roof 3 years ago. I was stuck, at least for now. The first violation notice arrived 5 days later. I found it tucked into my front door when I got home from school on Monday afternoon, a formal letter on West Mango Park HOA letterhead, signed by Patricia Whitmore in aggressive blue ink. Dear Miss Jones, it began, and I noticed immediately that she'd used Miss instead of the Miss I'd mentioned preferring. This letter serves as formal notice that your property at 420 Citrus Drive is currently in violation of HOA CC and R, Section 3.4.2, Mailbox Maintenance and Appearance. Your mailbox is painted in an unapproved color, sky blue, and shows signs of wear inconsistent with community standards. You have 14 days from the date of this notice to repaint your mailbox in an approved color, white, black, or forest green, or face a fine of $50. Please submit photographic evidence of compliance to the HOA within the specified time frame. I read it twice, anger building with each word. The mailbox. She'd actually cited me for the mailbox she'd mentioned the day I moved in, less than a week ago. I looked at it, standing there by the curb. Yes, the paint was slightly faded, but it wasn't peeling or damaged. It was just blue, a color my mother had chosen because it made her happy. But according to Patricia Whitmore's rules, my mother's happiness didn't matter. Only compliance mattered. I spent that evening at Home Depot, buying white exterior paint and a brush. I wasn't going to give Patricia the satisfaction of fining me, not over something this trivial. The next Saturday, I repainted the mailbox, covering Mom's cheerful blue with stark white that looked sterile and cold. I took photos with my phone, emailed them to the address on the violation notice, and tried to convince myself this was just the cost of living in an HOA community. The second violation notice arrived 3 days after I submitted the mailbox photos. This one cited Section 5.2.1, Lawn Maintenance Standards. Front lawn grass height measured at 3.7 inches, exceeding the maximum allowable height of 3 inches. You have 7 days to mow your lawn and maintain proper height or face a fine of $50. I stood in my front yard with a tape measure, feeling absolutely insane as I confirmed that yes, some of the grass blades were indeed 3.7 inches tall. I'd mowed the lawn 2 weeks ago when I first moved in, and apparently, in Florida's November weather, grass grows faster than Patricia Whitmore's patience allows. I mowed the lawn that evening after school. Even though it barely needed it, the mower leaving the grass so short it looked nearly scalped. More photos, more emails to the HOA. More of my life consumed by Patricia Whitmore's arbitrary rules. The third notice came a week later, and this one made my blood run cold. Dear Miss Jones, multiple residents have reported a persistent, unpleasant odor emanating from your property, described as cooking smells that permeate the neighborhood. While cooking is not prohibited, Section 7.3.5 requires that residents take reasonable measures to prevent odors from disturbing neighbors. Please ensure that all cooking activities are properly ventilated and that exterior doors and windows are kept closed during meal preparation. Failure to address this complaint may result in further investigation and potential fines. I read it 3 times, my hand shaking. Cooking smells. I was a vegan who mostly ate salads and roasted vegetables. I barely cooked anything that would produce a strong odor, and when I did, I used my range hood. But more than that, I recognized this tactic, the same one Mrs. Patterson had warned me about. This wasn't about actual smells. This was about Patricia making assumptions about what a black woman would cook, about fried chicken stereotypes and racist dog whistles wrapped in official HOA language. I didn't respond to that notice. I couldn't. I was afraid of what I might say, what I might do if I let myself fully process the implications. Instead, I called Mrs. Patterson, who came over immediately and stood in my kitchen sniffing the air like a bloodhound. Honey, your house smells like lavender and maybe some garlic from whatever you made for dinner. There's nothing unpleasant here, and certainly nothing that would permeate the neighborhood. Patricia's making things up. Her face was flushed with anger on my behalf. She's done this before. To the Hendersons claimed their barbecue smoke was a nuisance even though half the neighborhood barbecues every weekend. This is harassment, plain and simple. I felt tears prickling at my eyes but refused to let them fall. What am I supposed to do? I can't prove a negative. I can't prove my house doesn't smell. You document everything and you wait for her to make a mistake, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. People like Patricia always overreach, eventually. She'll slip up, and when she does, you nail her to the wall. The fourth notice arrived on a Friday, hand-delivered to my mailbox while I was at school. This one wasn't about violations, it was worse. Dear Miss Jones, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that there have been unusual activity patterns at your residence, including frequent visitors at irregular hours and vehicles parked in your driveway overnight in violation of Section 4.6.3. Additionally, residents have expressed concern about the nature of activities taking place at your property. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to investigate any behavior that may impact property values or community safety. Please be advised that the HOA board will be conducting enhanced monitoring of your property to ensure compliance with all community standards. You are required to attend a special HOA board meeting on November 28th at 7 p.m. at the community center to address these concerns. Failure to attend may result in fines and further action. I sat in my car in the driveway, reading and rereading that letter, and finally let myself cry. Unusual activity, frequent visitors at irregular hours, the nature of activities. She was implying I was dealing drugs. My parents' house, where Mom taught me to read on that front porch, and Dad coached me through algebra at the kitchen table, and Patricia Whitmore was suggesting I was running some kind of criminal operation. The frequent visitors were Mrs. Patterson stopping by with casseroles, and my friend Keisha from college who'd come over twice to help me unpack. The vehicles parked overnight was my own car, which I parked in the driveway because the garage was still full of my parents' belongings I hadn't had the heart to sort through yet. And the irregular hours were me coming home from school at 4:30 p.m. like a normal person with a normal job. This wasn't about HOA violations anymore. This was a campaign to force me out, to make my life so miserable that I'd sell the house and leave Patricia's precious neighborhood. And it was working. That night, I barely slept, anxiety churning in my stomach as I imagined facing a room full of neighbors at this special meeting, all of them looking at me like I was some kind of criminal. The next morning, Saturday, I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and trying to figure out what to do when someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my first paranoid thought was that it was Patricia coming to cite me for some new imaginary violation. Instead, I opened the door to find a white man in his late 30s or early 40s, with reddish-brown hair graying at the temples and kind hazel eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore jeans and a West Mango Park Community Garden t-shirt, and he held a basket of tomatoes. "Hi," he said with a warm smile. "I'm George Wilson. I live 2 streets over on Magnolia Drive. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that you're Robert and Linda's daughter, and I wanted to welcome you properly. Your parents were wonderful people. Your dad helped me build my garden shed a few years back, and your mom donated books to the community library every year." The kindness in his voice, the genuine warmth, made my eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Thank you. That's really kind. I'm Sam." I took the basket of tomatoes he offered. "Please, come in." George stepped inside and immediately looked around with appreciation. "You've kept the place looking great. Your mom loved this house." We sat in the living room, and something about George's open, trustworthy face made the words start spilling out before I could stop them. I told him everything: Patricia's visit the day I moved in, the escalating violation notices, the letter about cooking smells, and finally, the accusation of unusual activity and the mandatory HOA meeting. George's expression grew darker with each detail, his jaw tightening. "That's Patricia, all right. She's been pulling this garbage for years." He leaned forward, his voice intense. "Sam, I need to tell you something. I'm on the HOA board. I'm the treasurer. I've tried to push back against Patricia's methods for years, but she controls the board president position, and 2 of the other 4 board members always vote with her. The Johnsons and I have been outvoted on every attempt to reform the rules or rein in her enforcement." My heart sank. "So even the board can't stop her?" "Not yet. But that meeting she's forcing you to attend?" That's not a legitimate board meeting. She didn't notify the full board, didn't follow proper procedures. She's acting unilaterally, which violates our own bylaws. George pulled out his phone and started typing. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, a real one, with proper notice, and I'm inviting a lawyer friend of mine who specializes in HOA law. Patricia's been getting away with this behavior because people don't know their rights, but you have rights, Sam, and we're going to make sure they're protected. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt a spark of hope. You'd do that for me? You barely know me. George's expression softened. Your parents were good people who treated everyone with dignity and respect. Patricia is harassing you because she's a bigot who thinks she can use HOA rules to control who gets to live in her neighborhood. I've watched her drive out 3 families in the past 5 years with these same tactics, and I'm done staying quiet. He stood up, energized now. Document everything, every notice, every interaction, every communication. Take photos of your property showing it's well maintained. Get statements from Mrs. Patterson and anyone else who'll vouch for you. We're going to build a case that shows Patricia is selectively enforcing rules and harassing you specifically. I stood too, feeling steadier than I had in days. What about that meeting she scheduled for the 28th? Don't go. It's not legitimate, and you're not required to attend a meeting that wasn't properly authorized. Instead, come to our emergency board meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. at my house. We'll address this properly. George headed for the door, then turned back. Sam, I want you to know something. This neighborhood isn't Patricia Whitmore. Most of us are decent people who are horrified by her behavior. We've just been too complacent, too willing to let her operate unchecked because it was easier than fighting. But that ends now. The emergency HOA board meeting the next afternoon was held in George's spacious living room, and I walked in to find 5 people waiting. George, a black couple in their 60s who introduced themselves as Raymond and Denise Johnson, a white woman in her 50s named Carol Martinez, and a white man in his 40s wearing a suit who George introduced as Marcus Brennan, the HOA attorney. Patricia Whitmore was notably absent. I notified Patricia of this meeting as required by our bylaws, George said as we all took seats. She declined to attend and sent an email saying any meeting called without her approval is invalid. That email is actually helpful because it demonstrates her belief that she can act unilaterally. Marcus Brennan opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've reviewed the West Mango Park HOA bylaws and the documentation you provided, George, and I've also looked at the notices Miss Jones received. Let me be direct. Patricia Whitmore has violated multiple provisions of your HOA's governing documents and has potentially opened the association up to legal liability. He looked at me with sympathy. What's being done to you is called selective enforcement, and it's illegal. HOA boards are required to enforce rules uniformly and fairly. When they target specific individuals while ignoring the same violations by others, that's discrimination. Carol Martinez spoke up, her voice angry. I've lived here for 12 years, and my mailbox has been the same sage green for all 12 years. It's not even on the approved color list. Patricia's never said a word to me. She's targeting Sam specifically. My lawn is regularly over 3 inches, Raymond Johnson added. I've measured it after seeing Sam's violation notice. I've never received a citation, Denise nodded. And we barbecue in our backyard every Sunday after church. If Patricia really got complaints about cooking smells, why hasn't she cited us? We both know the answer. The evidence was mounting, and Marcus was taking notes. This is good. What we need to establish is a pattern of selective enforcement. George, you mentioned you have access to all violation notices issued in the past 3 years? I do. As treasurer, I track all fines levied and collected. I pulled the records last night. George opened his laptop and turned it so we could all see the spreadsheet on screen. In the past 3 years, Patricia has issued 143 violation notices. Of those, 92 were issued to just 6 properties, and 4 of those 6 were owned by people of color who have since moved away. Sam has received 4 notices in 2 weeks. The next highest number of citations for any current resident is 2 in 3 years. The numbers were damning, and seeing them laid out so starkly made the pattern undeniable. This wasn't about maintaining community standards. This was targeted harassment with a clear discriminatory intent. Marcus leaned back in his chair. We have grounds for removal. HOA board members can be removed for violating their fiduciary duty to the association, for acting outside their authority, and for discriminatory conduct. What I'm recommending is a three-pronged approach. He counted off on his fingers. First, we call a special meeting of all HOA members to vote on removing Patricia from the board. Second, we file a complaint with Florida's Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which oversees HOAs. Third, if Patricia doesn't cease her harassment immediately, Sam can file a civil suit for discrimination and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My head was spinning. This can escalate to a lawsuit? It can, Marcus said seriously, but my hope is it won't need to. Once Patricia realizes she's facing genuine consequences, she'll likely back down. Bullies usually do when someone actually stands up to them. George pulled up another document on his laptop. Our bylaws require that 20% of homeowners petition for a special meeting to remove a board member. We have 87 homes in West Mango Park, so we need 18 signatures. I've already talked to Mrs. Patterson, the Martins, and the Kowalskis. They're all willing to sign. We can have 18 signatures by tomorrow. Do it, Carol said firmly. I'll help collect signatures. Patricia's made this neighborhood a miserable place for anyone she decides doesn't meet her standards. It's time for her to go. Over the next 5 days, George, Carol, and Raymond canvassed the neighborhood with a petition calling for a special meeting to remove Patricia Whitmore from the HOA board and to revise the enforcement procedures to prevent future discrimination. They collected 43 signatures, nearly half the community. I watched from my window as neighbors I'd never met stopped by George's house to sign, many of them sharing their own stories of Patricia's arbitrary enforcement and hostile behavior. The Kowalskis had been threatened with fines for displaying a menorah during Hanukkah beyond the approved time frame. The Martins had been cited for their son's beat-up car being an eyesore, even though it was legally parked and in working condition. Even some of Patricia's longtime supporters signed, apparently fed up with her increasingly erratic behavior. The special meeting was scheduled for December 3rd at the community center, and the formal notice was mailed to every homeowner, including Patricia. She responded with a 5-page letter distributed to all residents, claiming the meeting was illegitimate, that George was staging a coup, and that I had manipulated the board with false accusations of racism. The letter also included a thinly veiled threat. If Miss Jones believes she is above our community standards, perhaps she would be happier elsewhere. Marcus Brennan reviewed Patricia's letter and practically beamed. She just handed us more evidence. This is textbook retaliation and continued harassment even after being put on notice that her conduct is under review. December 3rd arrived cold and rainy, the kind of gloomy weather that matched my churning anxiety. I drove to the community center with Mrs. Patterson, who'd insisted on accompanying me for moral support. The parking lot was packed. It seemed like half the neighborhood had turned out. Inside, the community room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where George, Carol, Raymond, Denise, and Marcus sat. Patricia was already there, seated in the front row with 3 other women I recognized as her closest friends in the neighborhood. She was dressed impeccably in a cream pantsuit, her blonde bob perfect, her expression one of cold fury. When I walked in, her eyes locked onto me with such hatred that I actually stopped walking for a moment. George called the meeting to order, explaining the purpose and the procedures. Tonight we're here to address serious concerns about selective enforcement of HOA rules and potential discrimination. We'll hear from several residents, review documentation, and then vote on whether to remove Patricia Whitmore from her position as board president and from the board entirely. Patricia stood up immediately. This is a farce. I've served this community for 8 years, and this is how I'm repaid? By being accused of racism because I dared to enforce the rules everyone agreed to? Her voice was sharp, aggrieved, the voice of someone who genuinely believed she was the victim here. Mrs. Whitmore, you'll have a chance to speak, George said evenly. But first, we need to present the evidence that prompted this meeting. For the next 45 minutes, Marcus Brennan methodically presented the case. The spreadsheet showing selective enforcement, testimony from residents who'd been targeted versus those who'd violated the same rules without consequence, copies of all 4 violation notices I'd received, with annotations showing how the same violations existed throughout the neighborhood. He displayed photos of mailboxes in unapproved colors, lawns longer than 3 inches, cars parked overnight in driveways, all belonging to white residents who'd never received citations. Then he read Patricia's letter about cooking smells and unusual activity, and asked me to describe what was actually happening at my house. I stood up on shaking legs and told my story about being a teacher who came home at 4:30 every day, about being a vegan who rarely cooked anything with strong odors, about Mrs. Patterson's casseroles and my friend's visits being characterized as unusual activity. By the time I finished, several people in the audience were shaking their heads in disgust. Patricia stood when I sat down, her face flushed. I have never, not once, made a decision based on anyone's race. I enforce the rules equally and fairly. If Miss Jones feels targeted, perhaps she should consider whether her own behavior has drawn attention. What behavior specifically? Marcus asked calmly. Patricia faltered. Well, the violations I documented. The same violations documented throughout the neighborhood that you've ignored in other cases. She recovered quickly. I can only respond to complaints I receive. If residents complain about her property, I have a duty to investigate. Did you receive complaints? Marcus pressed. Or did you initiate these violation notices yourself? The silence stretched long enough to be damning. Residents have expressed concerns to me informally. Names of these residents? Patricia's mouth opened and closed. I'm not going to violate their privacy by naming them publicly. Marcus smiled thinly. Convenient. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be direct with you. Your pattern of enforcement shows clear bias. Your escalating harassment of Miss Jones, culminating in unsubstantiated allegations about criminal activity, is discriminatory and potentially illegal. The question before this community tonight is whether they want to be represented by someone who uses HOA rules as a weapon against people she doesn't believe belong here. Raymond Johnson stood up. I'd like to say something. Denise and I have lived here for 15 years. We've watched Patricia target family after family, the Hendersons, the Wynns, the Ramirez family. Every single one of them was a family of color, and every single one of them left within a year or two because Patricia made their lives unbearable. This isn't about rule enforcement. This is about Patricia Whitmore deciding who gets to live in her neighborhood and using her position to push out anyone who doesn't fit her vision. The room erupted in conversation, people calling out their agreement or trying to defend Patricia. George banged a gavel I didn't even know he had. Order, please. It's time to vote. All residents present tonight are eligible to vote. The question is, should Patricia Whitmore be removed from the HOA board effective immediately? All in favor? Raise your hands. Hands shot up all over the room. I counted quickly and got to 37. All opposed? 8 hands, including Patricia's and her 3 friends. The motion carries. Patricia, you are removed from the board effective immediately. Please turn over all HOA documents, records, and association property to George Wilson within 48 hours. Patricia stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. This is illegal. I'll sue. I'll sue all of you. Her voice was shrill now, the professional veneer completely shattered. Marcus stood calmly. Mrs. Whitmore, the vote was conducted in accordance with your HOA bylaws. If you choose to pursue legal action, that's your right, but I should inform you that we're prepared to file a complaint with the state and to support Miss Jones in a civil action if your harassment continues. I strongly recommend you comply with tonight's decision and cease all contact with Miss Jones. Patricia's face went through several shades of red before settling on a mottled purple. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit, her 3 friends scrambling to follow. At the door, she turned back, her eyes finding mine across the room. You people always play the victim, she spat. You come into a nice neighborhood and ruin it with your accusations and your demands. This neighborhood was fine before you showed up. The room went dead silent. Mrs. Patterson's hand found mine and squeezed. George stood up. And there it is. Thank you for finally being honest about your motivations, Patricia. Get out. She left, the door slamming behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence that followed felt like the air after a storm, everyone exhaling, releasing tension, processing what had just happened. Then Mr. Smith started clapping. And the applause spread through the room until nearly everyone was standing, clapping not just for the outcome, but for finally confronting something that had poisoned the community for years. After the meeting, dozens of neighbors came up to introduce themselves and apologize for not speaking up sooner, for not realizing how bad it had gotten, for letting Patricia operate unchecked. Mr. Martin, whose son's car Patricia had targeted, shook my hand and said, "I'm ashamed I didn't sign that petition until George came to my door. I should have connected the dots years ago. I'm sorry. The Kowalskis invited me to Hanukkah dinner. The Nguyen's cousins, who'd moved into the house after the Nguyen's left, told me they'd been nervous about the same treatment and were relieved to see Patricia gone. Carol Martinez, who'd been elected interim board president by unanimous vote that night, promised immediate reforms, clearer enforcement procedures, a review process for violations, and a commitment to equal treatment. George walked me to my car after everyone else had left, the parking lot now empty except for our vehicles. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. Honestly, relieved, vindicated, still a little shell-shocked. "That's all completely reasonable," George smiled. "For what it's worth, your parents would be proud of you. You stood up for yourself when a lot of people would have just left. That takes courage." Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time they were different, not tears of frustration or fear, but of relief and something like healing. "Thank you, George, for everything. You didn't have to help me, but you did." "Yes, I did," he said firmly. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because this is a good neighborhood that deserves better than Patricia Whitmore's version of leadership. You belong here, Sam. Don't let anyone ever make you feel otherwise." I drove home through the dark streets of West Mango Park, past houses decorated with early Christmas lights, past the park where Dad used to take me to feed the ducks, past Mrs. Patterson's house, where a light burned in the window. When I pulled into my driveway and looked at my house, Mom's cheerful yellow siding, the porch light glowing warm, the white mailbox that I'd already decided I was repainting sky blue again, I felt something settle in my chest. This was home. Not because of the building or the memories, though those mattered, but because I'd fought for my right to be here and won. Because a community had stood up and said discrimination wouldn't be tolerated, that rules would be applied fairly, that everyone deserved dignity and respect. I walked up to the mailbox with my phone flashlight, examining it in the dark. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I'd go buy sky blue paint and reclaim this small piece of Mom's joy that Patricia had tried to erase. And if anyone had a problem with it, well, they could take it up with the new HOA board. I smiled to myself, unlocking the front door and stepping into the warm light of home. West Mango Park wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I wasn't going anywhere.